Welcome to Living the Empowered Life podcast, where we discuss all things empowering, encouraging and inspiring. My name is Yvonne Ellis. I'm an empowerment speaker, author, coach, trainer and founder of YEME Empowerment, a company that facilitates the empowerment of people. I help people to make positive life change, live in their purpose and develop into their best version of self. I share stories, interviews, spiritual encouragement and actionable tips to empower, encourage and inspire you to live the life you want. So if you want to live the empowered life, join me each week on my podcast so we can take the journey together. Hello Empowered Lifers, welcome to episode 3 of the podcast. Today I'm going to be talking to you about what I've learned about 2020. But before we get into the podcast, I just want to welcome those of you who are listening in for the first time. Thank you for joining me. And to those of you who are listening in again to another episode, thank you for your support. Please make sure that you subscribe to whatever platform this podcast is on, whether that's Apple, iTunes, Stitcher or Spotify, so that you can be notified of any new episodes that I upload. So I want to explain to you quickly why I call you Empowered Lifers. I was trying to think of something that was unique and personal to greet you with when you come onto this podcast. And I came up with the name Empowered Lifers because I believe everybody that's listening to this podcast is looking to be empowered, looking to be inspired, looking for long-lasting life change. Not just change for a minute or a moment, but change for life. So in today's episode, I want to talk to you about things I've learned about 2020. Now, this is a mixture of things personally that I've learned about 2020, just some general observations about 2020 as well. And I was inspired to do this podcast after reading my Vogue magazine this month on one of my little jaunts down to Kings Road in Chelsea, because I like to take myself off out on Fridays down to Kings Road, Chelsea and treat myself to a lovely coffee and cake. And obviously this was pre-lockdown because over here in the UK at the moment, we're on tier 4 lockdown again. But before that, that's what I would do. And I was reading this article in the Vogue magazine and it had 6 women talking about things they've learned from 2020. And I thought this is a really good thing to talk about because I believe that there is a lot of things that we can take away from 2020, whether we pay attention to them or not. I think that there are some very obvious lessons that are there. So I want to share with you personally some of the things that I've learned. And maybe some of the things that I share with you are things that probably you might have realised as well, or maybe your list might be different to mine. So the first thing that I learned about 2020 is that courage is the new way of life. Before 2020, I had already been living a life of courage of some sorts anyway, because I stepped out and left my job, as I mentioned on another podcast, in April 2018. And my lifestyle since that time has been one of taking risks and having courage. But again, I found this year that it took me to a new level of having to have courage, because professionally for me, all my work had more or less dried up. In my work that I do with my company, YEME Empowerment, I do training and events. And obviously these aspects of my work involve meeting with people, being in a sociable space. But with the lockdown and everything else that came with the lockdown, I had to think of a different way of doing business. Now, there's a word that has been kind of really overused during this pandemic, and I think you probably might know it, and that's the word pivot. But it is definitely true that I had to pivot the things that I do into the online space. So for instance, with my training, I had to readapt my training delivery to professionals to deliver online. I also had to learn new software such as MS Teams, which is a virtual platform that you can do meetings on or do workshops on to be able to deliver that training. I learned that and it was one of the best things that I did this year. It's not something that I thought of even before the pandemic. But there is a saying that goes, desperate times, desperate measures. And because of the time we're living in, I had to learn MS Teams like literally in one day, because I had a client that came to me and said, look, we want you to deliver this training. Do you know MS Teams? I said, honestly, not really much, but I will give it a try. But honestly, I didn't know anything about MS Teams. But what I did is to train myself. And in doing that, I was able to get new contracts. And further on from that, it opened up doors for me to have new income because other people, other organizations were asking me to deliver training via this MS Teams platform. So, it was a really nice and pleasant surprise. But I think that if I didn't have the courage to, go forward and learn something new like this MS Teams, I think that a lot of opportunities would be closed to me. And as a matter of fact, one of my clients said to me, they had other trainers who they had been using for years, but because of the fear of learning MS Teams and delivering online, a lot of them had turned down work. And, that was a real eye-opener for me, because I was thinking to myself, even in this time when all other avenues are blocked, even if you don't know something, you should be willing to try. So I'm glad that I had the courage to try new things, because in having courage, it definitely did pay off. Personally as well, I'm finding that this year I'm having to have courage to face some issues that I hadn't faced for my entire life. And it's not anything to do with, past childhood trauma or anything, but I think it's to do with habits and a mindset I had towards certain aspects of things in my life. And this year, actually, because of the whole situation with the pandemic, I've had to get myself into a space mentally and emotionally to start dealing with some of those things that have been ingrained in me from childhood. I'm not going to sit here and say to you that it's going to be easy for me. And I think one of the first most important steps that anyone can have in acknowledging that things need to change is to admit to it, and then having the courage to then go on to start facing that thing. So that is where I'm at personally in my life. And it was a series of different realizations I had about my attitude towards this certain thing, how I handled this certain thing. And, I will share more with you when I go through the process, because I do think it's one of those things that I've recognized that if I don't deal with it, it's going to have a real knock-on impact on how I go about living the empowered life